No, well, they still.
So I am going to record this session just because we did have a couple of people reach out who said unfortunately they could not join us. I hope that that's not a problem. We'll put it on our YouTube channel and hopefully, other folks who are interested in this topic will be able to participate. Hello, everyone. My name is Kelly Nevins. I am the CEO of the Women's Fund of Rhode Island. Our mission is to invest in women and girls, and we do that through research, advocacy, grant making, and strategic partnerships designed to achieve gender equity through systemic change. So we just have this teeny tiny little goal, this achieving gender equity, which also means we can't do that until we address all of the equities or inequities, if you will, that exist here in the state of Rhode Island. We are proud members of the Women's Funding Network, which works with women's funds all around the world. We don't all do exactly the same thing, but we all are working towards the same goal, which is to help everyone to thrive in the worlds that they exist in. So I'm so pleased to have you here. I'm also so grateful and pleased to be here at the new location of the Rhode Island Black Business Association. Thank you to Lisa for hosting us this evening. The goal of tonight is to talk a little bit about some research that the Women's Fund of Rhode Island has been involved in, talk about state boards and commissions, and also large nonprofit boards in Rhode Island, and really to talk about the need for more diversity at those tables where people lead, where decisions are made and resources are allocated. Tonight, I am so pleased that we have three really fantastic folks with us who are going to be part of a panel discussion. We have Marcela Betancourt, who is the Executive Director of the Latino Policy Institute, has been honored by the Women's Fund of Rhode Island for her advocacy work in the broader community. We have Lisa Ranglin, who is the President and CEO of the Rhode Island Black Business Association, soon to be honored by the Women's Fund of Rhode Island for her advocacy work in the state. And last but not least, we have Craig Dwyer, who is the Director of Appointments for the Governor. Before we start with questions, I want to set the stage, and I also want to do a little bit of logistics. Certainly feel free to get refreshments if you want and or need them. If you go around the circle, this hallway is a circle, you will find a restroom that is connected to it's sort of direct diagonal from this wall here. So feel free if you need to get up and move around. So recently, the Women's Fund of Rhode Island put out a report called the Census of Directors and board members at Rhode Island's largest nonprofit organizations. Concurrently, there has been some research that was started over at Johnson & Wales University that's moved over to Rhode Island College, that is looking at the diversity of members of state boards and commissions throughout the state. And what we know from the report that's completed and the report that is in process right now is that there are 21% of women on nonprofit boards throughout the state, large nonprofit boards. Those boards are made up of 21% women, and the other large amount as people who don't identify as women, and 41% on state boards and commissions. We also know that with representation from the Black, Indigenous, and people of color communities, that those numbers are much smaller. So 8% make up the largest nonprofit board members, 17% on state boards and commissions. And if you intersect the race and gender of folks who serve on those, you can imagine that the representation by BIPOC women on these boards and commissions is extremely small. What we know from the research is that the percentage of women who are serving, regardless of their race and gender, has been dropping. And we believe that part of the reason for that is that there was COVID, and a lot of women not only stepped out of the workforce. We experienced a she session across the country where women had to step out to care for their family members, whether it was their younger children who weren't in school, or perhaps they're part of a sandwich generation, their older parents needing care. What we know is that a lot of women dropped out of the workforce. What we didn't anticipate is that it would cross over to nonprofit boards so significantly, and also on state boards and commissions. The last statistics that I will share on state boards and commissions is that we know that 75% of members who we were able to verify membership on state boards and commissions, 75% of them were over the age of 51. So on state boards and commissions, we also see that we have a much older representation of folks who are serving at that level. And so tonight's panel is really meant to explore, okay, the data's not great. What does it mean? Why is it important to know about it? And then what possibly can we do to change the narrative? And finally, what can our audience and people who are interested in serving on nonprofit boards or state boards and commissions do? And so what I'd like to do first is direct my first question to Marcela, again, with the Latino Policy Institute. The Latino Policy Institute has been working on some of this research for quite a long time, tracking board and commission appointments. Why? Why have you been paying attention to this issue?
Thank you. So when I came into the Latino Policy Institute, I actually found some information from, this is when we were at Roger Williams University, and I found information from about 2017, 2018 that Professor Speakman or Representative Speakman did with some of her class around boards and commissions and women. I think it focused on women. And at the time, I remember when I was coming in, I've always been a big advocate of being on boards. I think boards actually have made me a better professional. I've been in nonprofit boards since I started my professional career, and I'm a big fan of them. And however, I also believe that civic engagement means being on local boards and commissions. And I found that you can't find information anywhere. Secretary of State's website is really difficult. And then if you go to a municipal website, it's even harder. So in the middle of COVID, we worked with a class at Roger Williams to try to do this on a municipal level. And we said, let's narrow down the scope and let's do 5 cities and towns that have like the highest number of Latinos. And it was really incredible to see these students who were doing their masters, and they were so frustrated at the lack of information the municipalities had. And which is so understanding of, then the state is so much bigger. And it was a frustration that one of them actually was from one of these municipalities, and she was calling and saying, I just need information. Like, I am a constituent. And there was so little information, not only that is gathered, but also able to share, even though these are public bodies. And so part of why it's a priority for us is that when it comes to our work at the Latino Policy Institute, in order to communicate and really understand the experiences and the changing experiences of the Latino community, and how do we advocate for better policies around health, education, civic engagement, that means having those individuals at the table. Sometimes I believe a public body that's a board has a lot more power sometimes than elected officials. And so I think that's why we have to be at the table. And I'm really excited that, you're all part of this conversation and this research.
And Marcela, could you talk to us a little bit about how LPI is working to change this narrative? What are you doing to encourage more diversity at those tables?
Yeah, no, that's great. And so part of it is we are hoping to support the Women's Fund and other orgs as you're doing this research. But I think one of the big things that we're hoping to do is, how do we, after this, and in the work that we're doing, how do we create more access and information to what being in these boards mean? And more importantly, what are the results of those boards? So I think that has to be a really important part one of the things that, so we've worked with Common Cause, who's a good government organization, for a while, doing this thing that they do every year called Demystifying Democracy. And last year we did one about municipal government. And it was the first time that Common Cause actually had translation in Spanish, which was really helpful because it invites individuals who that might be a barrier for, but also it provided really the logistics of what municipal government works. And our state has 39 tiny cities and towns, and it is a crazy place sometimes. And so to me, that is us starting to provide access and information, but we hope that as we continue to do more work, not only supporting legislation to encourage this, but also I think being on the ground and helping with information and really debunking some of the ideas of what being on these boards means.
Thank you. Thank you. So Lisa, you often are talking about the importance of diversity, and I ask you to repeat a lot of what you say at this point. You know, why is diversity a good thing, whether it's within business or on state boards and commissions or nonprofit boards?
Yeah, so thank you so much, Kelly. Let me just say it's actually frightening in our society today because everybody's scaling back on efforts as it relates to diversity, equity, and inclusion, right? When we think about where funding are being cut across the board. It's no longer a sexy thing to talk about investing in diversity, equity, and inclusion, right? So when we talk about the value that brings, we know when companies or when, leadership teams or boards or commissions are diversified, what happens? More innovation, right? More ideas are brought to the table. We also know from data, right? Lots of data points out of McKinsey and Company and others talks about the value. Teams that are more diversified outperform companies that are not just with workforce, but also from a profitability perspective. So we're seeing more revenues. But when we think about, let's look across the nation, look across our city, we know that the demographic is changing, right? Women and minorities, all of us are in this together, right? And if we leave a segment of the population behind, what happens? Many of us probably heard Rhode Island is one of the worst states to do business. Why? You have a population of businesses that's been shut out of access to contracts and access to capital, access to resources to grow and scale. So when we think about experiences and different perspectives at the table, those perspectives and experiences and ideas bring to market more innovations, more products and services. And can you imagine if all of us in the room sounded alike and had the same ideas? We need differences, right? It's super important. What I would say, and I've been challenging corporate, I've spent 23 years in corporate, Bank of America, Fleet, and Citizen. And what I continue to do is to challenge leaders to think about how do we level the playing field in a meaningful way? It's not that token female or that token person of color, but really in an intentional way. And I think I finalized my doctoral application, what I want to study when I start pretty soon, specifically around talking to white men. What are the factors that you're looking for? What makes you so afraid of having women at the table? What are you afraid of having people of color at the table as it relates to sitting in decision-making roles? When the data speaks to the value that backgrounds of people bring, right? I've had the pleasure of working in 3 large financial institutions across the state that are, some of them are national organizations. And I have challenged them to say, why do we have so few women in commercial lending? So commercial lending from a banking perspective are your large ticket items, right? So your yachts and planes and all these big ticket. Why do we have so few women? Let's look at technology. So we're still seeing a segregation of, think of technology, right? If you're in technology, you newly got married, oh my God, she's gonna get pregnant. She's gonna need time out. She's gonna want work-life balance. All of these things are really scary to folks that are really not understanding what bringing your whole self to work really means, right? I think we have to flip it upside down. It's no longer a nice thing to talk about DEI. It's an imperative. It's really critically important for us to prioritize diversity, equity, and inclusion, and not like something that we're afraid of talking about. The other thing that I would challenge us to think about as we're working and interacting with leaders in our circles is to think about really talking about the hard questions, right? I think if we are too comfy, what happens? Nothing happens. We stay with the status quo, right? I think we must get okay with feeling uncomfy. And for the folks that are in the room that consider themselves ally, right? I think I would challenge you to become disruptors. Are you willing to take some scars to change the landscape for all of us? And I think that's the question that we should ask ourselves. Are we willing to do that? I have plenty of scars. I shared with a gentleman that asked the question, Lisa, why are you not afraid? I was born and raised in poverty in Jamaica. As a teenage girl running around, shots are fired, all of those crazy things that are happening. I'm not afraid of anything because we came so close to dying, living in poverty and gun-infested city, that nothing scares me anymore. So I think all of us need to think about what if, put ourselves in somebody else's shoe.
Thank you. Thank you. So you've already partially answered this question, but the Supreme Court last year struck down affirmative action in colleges and universities, thus taking away the sort of, like why should you be tracking the diversity of folks who are trying to apply to universities, and why should you try to find some balance in diversity? There has been a sort of fallover effect where, as you noted, businesses are pulling away from some of their DEI programming. We've even heard of some funders being concerned about funding specifically around DEI initiatives. What would you say to those folks about being afraid and why we should be continuing to keep our eye on this tracking of this information and trying to keep that balance of diversity?
Yeah, that's such a great question, because I think that ruling was focused on higher ed, right? But I think no one wants to spend a lot of money in litigation. Let's be real, right? So even us as a organization that focus on the communities with the greatest need, right? So we focused on, regardless of race or gender, we focus on communities with the greatest needs, right? Funders have called us and say, Lisa, we're funding you. We want to make sure that your programming is actually open to everyone. So we've actually done that, right? We've gone through, stripped our program and making sure that everybody knows the programs are open to anyone and everyone. However, from a target perspective, we focus on those communities with the greatest needs. Mm-hmm. When you look at the data points, you're talking about your poor white, your Black, your browns. Mm-hmm. The data speaks for itself as it relates to the needs. We know that homeownership, for example, in the Black community, 32%. Mm-hmm. Most Black families don't have $400 in the bank for emergency, right? So those are real. So when funders reach out to me, and I've gotten plenty of funders, and companies have called and asked about my process or my input around diversity investment, what I would say, if we continue to do the same thing that we've been doing for decades, we're going to get the same results. And what I've challenged some of them to think about is, when we are thinking about driving changes, it is not easy. And I've had one of the largest foundation in the state. If you are willing to invest the same way year over year and no results, then you're not thinking about it from an equitable standpoint. We must be willing to hold the line as it relates to being on the right side of history. And the right side of history is to take everyone along with us, to create resources and make them available and level the playing field. If there are people that's at the bottom there has to be that reach back and help to elevate. So I would, and I share this, I say, we must be bold. We must find the courage.
Mhm.
And we must work very hard to educate other folks out there that are saying, I'm pulling back. I'm pulling back because I don't want to get, a lawsuit. I don't want to be all of this. I don't want to be all of that. Stand on the premise of you're following the data.
Right.
What the data tells us is that there's a host of people that are, for structural racism, right, is real. And in order for us to create that level playing field, let's talk about education outcome, for example. The state is focused on absenteeism right now. Absenteeism is not just in the urban core.
Mhm.
We paint the picture like it's only in the urban core, but we know that many children across the board, right? Moms are concerned that their children are detached. They're not going to school. They don't, and across the spectrum, right? In Barrington, in East Greenwich, all over the state, the data points speak to moms are very concerned. We want our kids back in school. Why are they not going? So we gotta I think, courage. We also have a choice. I think I would encourage funders and leaders out there to be bold and to hold the line as it relates to being on the right side of history.
Thank you. Thank you. Now, I know that we're probably speaking to an audience of friends and allies who believe in the importance of diversity at all of those tables where leadership is taking place, where decisions are being made and resources are being allocated. However, we're not always sure about how we can help. And so, Craig, what I would love for you to talk about is the current process for recruiting folks to become part of state boards and commissions. How, presuming we can bring along a diverse group of candidates, what do we do?
Well, the first thing we need is applications, I suppose. So right now, as we sit, there's roughly about 325 boards, and some of those are totally inactive. I know Marcella sits on at least one or two.
Just one. Yeah.
Just one.
Just
We'll
one.
fix that tomorrow.
No.
Okay.
Please.
You'll be sorry you said that. Anyway, no. So one of the things, you said an interesting thing about, somebody said about age over 50, and that's a big part of it. A lot of these boards and commissions operate during business hours.
That's right.
So if you're working in a position, I know quite honestly, I've been asked to serve on a local board or whatever. I can't do it because I spend days and nights and weekends on, and I would love to do it because I love that diverse thing. And diversity, I'm talking about different jobs to do. I love that because it takes the pressure off of whatever you've got your mind wrapped around all the time. But that's one of the problems we have. And that's why when I went back, it was recently, somebody asked me about the Washington Bridge. How does that affect boards and commissions? And I went back over some of the things, some of the old database that I had. And the thing that jumped out at me was I have a lot of the same names on there. And why do I have the same names? Because some people like to step up and some people get involved. And it's very easy when I need somebody, I'll say, gee, this one, I remember she was on that one and he was on that one. So it's very easy to go back to the same people all the time. We would love to have, I think, was it November that it came? We were at the convention center, I think it was November, whatever. And I gave out a website that somebody can go on. It's on the Secretary of State. I didn't get one application from that. Now, again, I'm not, it's difficult sometimes when people say, I want to get involved, I want to do this. I almost guarantee you, I'll find something for you. It maybe not be the number one thing you want because sometimes the way the statutes are written, it has to be some particular thing. And I don't want to bore you by getting into the weeds, but some of them are, each board and commission is established through a state statute or sometimes an executive order, but they're all very specific. I would love to get back to the person that wrote those and say, why did you write it this way? Because it excludes some of the things. But most, it never is gender. It's, let me rephrase that. I think maybe there's one or two that is gender, and there's probably about 4 or 5 that need an equal amount of Democrats or Republicans on them in certain areas, but it may be a board of 15, so you have to have 2 Democrats and 2 Republicans. That doesn't mean you can't have 4 Republicans, but you have to fulfill that. So there are a lot of criteria that goes into it, but if anybody applies for something, I'm gonna find you a job. And I'll find a board that you can live with, whatever your time constraints are. I had another one that I just had recently. It was one of the treasurer's boards, and he wanted a person to fulfill this particular spot, and I went to the person and I said, it meets on Wednesday mornings at 9 a.m. Person said, I can't do that. I can't, because I have another board that coincidentally meets at the same time. Well, I went back to the treasurer and I said, how stuck are you on that 9 a.m. on a Wednesday, I think it was? Oh, we can move it to anything you want. And I went back to the person, and they're still deciding, I gotta tell you that. So I still haven't got that particular thing conquered. But the boards really should run in the, late afternoons or early mornings. There's not many that work on a Saturday. Most boards and commissions have I call it board manager, and that's not the proper terminology, but they're all should be under some state agency, so that all of the clerical things should be supported by a state agency.
So is there a public facing place that people can find out accurate information about openings on state boards and commissions?
I wish I could say yes, but I can't. Honestly, I sit here, you and I have had that conversation before. Secretary of State's website has all boards and commissions in the state. They not only have the state boards and commissions, but they have every city and town boards and commission. So they probably, where I've got 325, they probably have maybe 1,500. And unfortunately, the information that goes into that is only as good as, and I'll give you an example. I think you and I had talked about this before. When I appoint somebody, and I say I appoint him, I'm the guy that writes out the paperwork and gets them all the paperwork. And if it, depending on whether it's a Senate advice and consent, which is a longer process, I think you had to go through that before. I don't know whether you've ever been through that or not, Lisa.
I started, but I could not.
Okay, yeah, and it's a cumbersome
The bank,
process.
yeah.
And, but it is what we have to work with right now. And unfortunately, as much as I keep trying to change it, and we've changed a little bit. But anyway, and there's non-ANC, which is, I can just, as of today, I get your application and everything works out. We have a group that meets weekly, and there's 5 to 7 people. There's the chief of staff, 2 or 3 deputy chiefs of staff, myself, 2 attorneys, both ladies, I might say, but we have our diversity officer, Pastor Chris, that sits on that meeting. Now, do we all attend the meetings? Unfortunately, that's my meeting, so I have to attend it. But not everybody else gets there, but we all try to do it. And we try to do, if you know Governor McKee, and I've known him for 40 some odd years, he is as diverse as it goes. He started the charter school, but with the intention that it was going to do the lower income, the Blackstone Valley Prep. And, I've followed him for the last 40 years. We both kind of grew up in the Boys and Girls Club. As a matter of fact, he'll tell you that it was a boys club until he got to be president and changed to the Boys and Girls Club.
So let me interrupt you for
sure.
a minute. And so right now, the way the process works is you gotta know a guy, meaning Craig
Yeah,
Dwyer.
right, yeah.
So you gotta
Yeah.
know a guy
You gotta know
to
Craig.
Yeah, and-
submit your application to get it
Yeah,
to get it
And
reviewed and
Sure.
hopefully connected to a board, a state board or
Yeah.
commission, not the same process for nonprofit boards.
no,
Craig, what are you doing
What
to
you do
change
when
that
you- right.
process?
And when you get a resume from somebody that you don't know, what do you do?
oh, we sit in this meeting, if somebody knows them, that's fine and dandy. If they don't know them, then I send out the application. Usually we get resumes in, in a letter of intent, I'd like to do this, here's my background, here's my,
Okay.
I always ask for a resume because that does some, and sometimes we select LinkedIn, but they're not always as informative as they should be. So, but a lot of times I'll get applications from somebody that wants, pick out a board, education, let's say, just for example. And I don't have any room on the education board, but I'll look at that thing and I'll keep that, and I'll look at their resume and kind of think what they want to do. And if I have an opening in something else, then I'll reach back out. Would you be interested in this? Would you be interested? So, I'll stand by what I said before. If you send me an application, I'll find a spot for you
How do I
somewhere.
get an application?
It's very easy. I can give you my email address.
But that's the thing, it's only if I know you that. I
No,
can
no,
get
no,
it.
no, no. You can send it into the governor's office. You can send it into anybody. And
Gotcha.
eventually it'll get to me. It
Gotcha.
should get to me.
We will
I've-
provide
Yes.
Craig's email
Yeah,
address.
absolutely. I do
Yeah.
have a,
I think, it would be great for us to think about optimization and
Yeah.
Yeah.
enhancement. So
Yeah.
Support that.
while
right.
I understand and I hear the current process.
Yep.
It's the current state, but I think it would be great to put some recommendation forward to say, here's what this could look like.
Mhm.
Right,
To create more sort of accessibility, if you will.
right.
And because I've gone on that site, you and I have talked
Sure,
numerous times,
sure.
and there's so many on the state level, never mind
Oh,
at the
yeah.
city level.
Yeah.
And the biggest challenge that I saw was the description.
yes.
It needs to be enhanced specifically around what is the duties and responsibility of
Right.
this commission. So I think, I'm not sure of the process of enhancement, but I would recommend that we consider what are the actionable steps that we could take over the next 5-6 months
Mhm.
that will create a more direct access path to ensure that we have diverse candidates throughout the
Mhm.
state
Right.
and
Right.
boards and commissions.
And here is your opportunity. to
Yes,
talk
here we
a little
go.
bit
Okay,
About what
that-
you're working on.
And you and I have talked about this before. So we've been, I've been talking to the powers to be about a website that is a governor's website, not necessarily the Secretary of State. Now, I'm not going to throw the Secretary of State's office under the bus
Mhm.
because there are reasons that is inaccurate.
Mhm.
And it's not through their own fault, believe me. I work with them on a daily basis and we try to do it. However, we have talked about, and I was hoping for lobbying on your part as well, and we're getting closer, but there's one website that I see, it's put out by a person in Johnson. Right now, his price is just a little bit too high. It's much too high, but nonetheless, it's a perfect facing, public facing, as well as a internal facing, for lack of a better term, correct. So that I can actually put on there a little summary of it. How often do they meet? What is the purpose of it? And also, what are the statutory duties? I can just pick out anyone. Let's take the education, and that's full up right now. But you have to have some sort of a background for pre-K or elementary school or secondary school or college. And you have to have some sort of a connection with that to be considered. And but nonetheless, we've got people of all walks of life that certainly could be in. That's probably not a very good example, but economics is a good one.
So the Secretary of State's website that you keep mentioning is not necessarily the website to apply.
No,
That's just to tell you what's out there.
however, if you
The
go,
only way to apply is through.
no, actually, on the Secretary of
There's a
State's
button,
website
there's
has
a button.
the connection to meet governor boards and commission, so you can apply through that if you want. You have to
Okay,
apply
okay,
through a portal,
okay.
so it's a,
The challenge with the Secretary of State's website is that a lot of the information that's
not up-
there
Yes,
is
yeah.
out of date.
Out of date.
I know.
Yeah, Yeah.
I'm just trying to figure out in my mind, because I talk to a lot of people,
Mhm.
right? And I haven't talked on Spanish radio and all that stuff,
Sure.
but it's like, it's going to the website, which may not have the information updated, but to actually get there is really emailing and connecting with you.
That'd be the
Gotcha.
perfect way.
Yeah.
But if you send something, a letter to the governor's office, to his email address, eventually it's gonna get to me. It's gotta go through 3 departments, but eventually it's gonna get to me. So the easiest thing, if you want to take my email address, is just send it off to me. And I'll tell you what we need and what we don't need, and whether we have openings or not. The other thing is I put my, cell phone is working, 24 hours a day. I don't always answer it at 3 o'clock in the morning, but
Yeah.
I do have it, and I tell people, you wanna get through to me, that's the way. So if you have something you see or something you're interested in, give me a call. I'll try to answer that as best I can, as soon as I can as well. So I'm still a department of one person. It's called me, myself, and I. But
So-
go ahead.
Yeah, so there is a small working group of folks
Yes.
that is working not only with Craig, but with the Secretary
Yeah.
of State's office. And we hope to have more engagement with the Equal Opportunity Office
Yeah.
moving forward. That is both sort of working inside and outside. And part of this is just the collection of data so that we can use this as a
Mm.
fact-based platform to say, hey, here's what it looks like diversity-wise today, and we need to change the narrative.
Mm.
And I want to thank the folks in this room who've been involved in that process for your work on that. From a legislative perspective, we do have Representative Speakman and Senator Valverde who are working on some pieces of legislation that, if nothing else, will mandate the collection of data that on a regular basis that just identifies, okay, how diverse are our boards every year? And having that information easily accessed is a step in the right direction. Internally, we're trying to work with making sure that there are enough resources that are budgeted at the state level to have things like this database, like to have enough staff to actually make sure that those connections to those appointments are happening much quicker. Now, assuming that we are getting better or will get better at the state appointments process, I still think we have a job to encourage folks to actually apply and help motivate them to serve on these state boards and commissions. And I would love for Marcella to share about what your experience has been like on the boards, the Board of Elections. Yeah.
Yeah, so my process, for me, I was asked if I would be interested in the Board of Elections, the state board, and I was told a little bit about what happens and how long it is. I believe it's the longest tenure. It's 9 years.
Yes, it is.
And that almost made me
You
not
didn't
do
know
it.
that when you
I
signed
did,
it?
I
Okay,
did, and I
right.
still did it. And so I was told it was 9 years, sort of, but I was also mistakenly told it's not that bad. Things are, typically quiet unless it's an election year. I'm not joking. Somebody
No,
said that to me. It was horrible, and
Who said that to you? I wanna
some
know
person
that.
that I will never trust anything they say
Okay.
again.
Yeah, give me
Um,
that name, because
yeah.
I'll be.
And so once I said, yes, that's fine, put my information through,
Mm.
I did what Craig said, and so I sent a resume and a letter of intent. And to me, it was the first time I ever had to do the process. I was also in a board within the city of Providence. I was in the Housing Authority Board. And so as my application sort of went through like the channels that needed to, the governor's office approved it, suddenly I was told, you need to quit that board. That's very few times. There's certain boards that you can't be part of other
Correct.
boards.
Correct.
And so that was fun. So I had to quit this board that I really loved. But then I was like, but then I have 3 other people you can have instead. And the process was really scary because I had needed to go through Senate consent, but Craig was really helpful at sort of being like, these are the documents you need. The governor's office was really helpful in the process. And so I spoke to certain senators around it. And the process was terrifying. I testify in front of like Senate Judiciary every year and it's not a problem, but this time you're telling them why apparently you should go and like protect elections for the state. And that was terrifying. So the process itself was beautiful. It was really interesting, but it was also really difficult. I had I think because of my professional like life and the work and connections I had, especially at the legislature, I think it was easier to be handheld a little bit through the process. I think that if that wasn't the case, it would have been a lot more difficult. Again, even just like being able to like connect with Craig, that was great, but what if I didn't know anybody at the governor's office? I think that would have been really difficult when the process started, because once it started, it kicked off really quickly, because it was at the end of session. And so things moved really quickly. Because it's the Board of Elections, there was drama about it. And so that was hard. And it was really helpful to know people. But again, not everyone will have that. Like I have that privilege and I hold that privilege. And so to your point, when we are able to share with others, like, hey, you should join this, if they're not part of the world today, where we may know legislators and people at the governor's office, I think that also becomes our role of how to prepare them through that process. And Craig said not everybody will go through Senate, but just in general, even just sitting at the Board of Elections and signing things for them, that was really difficult. I wish I would have known, what he said is true. I have the privilege again, that because I'm the executive director, I get to sort of make my own schedule. There are meetings this week at the Board of Elections. There's 3 meetings, right? Yes, it's a presidential primary. And so that's a really big deal. And it's something that other individuals, depending on their jobs or their families, wouldn't be able to do. So as Craig said, it's like an extra magic wand, but it would be beautiful to have those layers as part of.
Yeah.
information.
So one of
I
the-
have
okay.
a quick question, because as I'm sitting here, there are top tier boards and commission that people wants to be on, right?
Yeah, there's
And
a
then
few. Yeah.
there are the low level one that no one's to be on. So
Yeah,
can you speak to, because it's sort of like, again, it's the good old boy network, right? Or you gotta know somebody to get into
No.
those.
I like to think not, but anyway,
Well-
that's okay.
So from a factual perspective, there are boards where the same kinds of people that have been sort of roadblocks that have not made any changes in a meaningful way continues to be on those, what we consider those in a banking world, the sexy boards, right? How do we get to a place where it is more open and it's not so sort of cherry picked? You're gonna be in this one because it's important, right? So there's a handful of those boards that everybody wants to be on, right? So for example, the boards that I'm talking about, right?
Ethics.
How do we ensure that those boards
Are there paid boards?
are diversified and they're
So those
paid
are
boards,
boards.
right?
I think we want.
There's about 5 paid boards.
No, it's not a lot of them.
Out of 325. Now, they tell me at one time, every board was paid. And the job that I had was the most popular job in the state of Rhode Island. I told that to the governor not too long ago, and he said, well, maybe we ought to look at paying everybody for every board. Well, of course, then I added up the numbers and I said, well, do you have, another $20 million that you can spend? Because what is too much? So there is only, I think, 5 boards that are, and one is a parole board, and you have to have specific, really, you have to have specific, not only education, but background in that particular thing. There's one board, I think, that's Blue Cross board, but that's paid by, not the state, but it's paid by Blue Cross. And that has a cycle on it. You can only be on there for 8 years or 6 years, and then you've got to get off. So I had a list of the paid boards, but they're, they're few and far. I'm sorry.
Elections and ethics too.
Yeah, but you don't get paid much for the,
It's
no,
not much.
no, and then that's
Go
the
to so many
problem.
meetings.
So even some of the paid boards are not enough to compensate you.
Yeah.
If you're looking for that as a part-time job.
Yeah.
Believe me, you're spending more time than you
I've been on
probably,
boards for 30 years,
Have
so
you?
I know,
Okay,
it's-
yeah.
most of them, it's none.
no, I mean, most of them are, it's public service is what it is.
Yeah.
Yeah, I was more getting at how do we, because where I'm going with this specifically, again, if we're going to change the landscape in a meaningful way, we can't have the same old, right? So I want us to think from the perspective of how do we identify those boards that we consider the critical boards and evaluate the structure when they meet, have, open transparency around that, and really work intentionally to find people to make them a part of the pipeline. So maybe there's no open in the current state,
Mhm.
but what does that timeline looks like when you're gonna roll people off? And do you have a robust pipeline for each of these critical boards and commissions? Because I think I would raise my hand to say I want to help with the pipeline development
Mhm.
to make sure that if we know people are gonna be cycling off 2 years, 3
Yeah.
years,
How to prepare them.
we prepare that pipeline.
Sure.
That's a good idea.
Right? So I think we need to think about how do we get to that place, right? If there are 3,6,500, what is it, 300
325.
325 boards? Which ones are sort of operational, active, that have the biggest decision-making or the largest implication,
Yeah.
one way or the other, right? Let's zoom in on those and prioritize that, right?
Thank you for the opportunity. I'm supervising two BSW students from Rhode Island College who are each very active in their communities. One student is Haitian immigrant, the other is African American man. They had no idea. They've been collecting the data, analyzing the data for Jordan, and they had no idea about all of these boards. And so we've been talking about what kind of outreach needs to go into the community. And having sat on boards, gubernatorial boards, 30, 40 years ago, I know that it's about who do you know and how do you get in? And they had no idea, which means the community doesn't know that these exist, let alone that there's an opportunity to volunteer.
Yeah.
And so whether it's students, whether it's families who have an at-home member who is doing at-home things and has the flexibility to sit on a board, to speak from the Haitian community, to speak from the African-American community, the Hispanic community. They don't know. There's no outreach, there's no advertisement, there's no publicity. I offer that for your consideration.
Very good.
Go
I
ahead.
would add to that, that even when there is outreach, the narrative that it's who you know, even when we have made steps, as it sounds like you have, to reduce the extent to which that's true, the cultural belief that it is still only who you know, and that the expectations or qualifications are at some level that like normal people can't meet, are so powerful that among the most qualified people in the community will not, it's not that they don't, it's not that they're
Won't
not
even apply.
motivated. Somebody used the word motivation before, right? It's not that they're not motivated. It's
Yeah.
that they feel that no one like them would ever be wanted
Yeah.
or desired, that they are not ready or qualified, and so they will not put their name forward, right? And so, Marcella got asked, right? We have to ask. We have to tell these folks
Yeah.
that they are qualified. If we wait for them to nominate themselves
Yeah.
without changing a culture first, it will not happen.
I'm sorry. So you just said something that bothers me anyway. You need to know somebody. I can't speak to what happened prior to 3 years ago because I've only been in this position for 3 years. But I can guarantee you that Governor McKee and myself, if you knew either one of us, you'd know that we're not part of an old boy network. That disgusts me to no end when people say that. I'm not gonna say that isn't the perception out there, but I can guarantee you that's not what has been happening.
Change the perception.
Well, I
Not just
try
that,
to do it. No, I'd love to, love to. Well, aside from coming out to stuff like this, I don't know what else to do. And I say that, there are plenty we can do. But the reason we reached out to Marcella is because we sat around, anybody know that somebody could, and her name came up. And quite honestly, I can't remember which one of the 7 or 8 of us brought the name up. And I think it might have been Rico, if I'm not mistaken.
Yeah.
And he said, oh, she'd be great for this board. And that's how we got hooked up with her. I didn't know her from Adam before that. But this is how we do it. And, and I don't know, I've never had an application that I said, well, I don't know this person, boom. That doesn't happen. I keep everything So anyway, I'm not gonna speak to what happened 10 years ago, 5 years ago. The previous administration, 5 administrations previous to that. I don't know. I can tell you what's happened in the last 3 years, so.
Craig, could you quickly, is there any like one or two boards or
Yeah,
commissions
I
that you're
just-
looking to fill right now?
Yeah, I just jotted down some, and again, this is not the entire list, but disability, ethics, human trafficking, prejudice and bias, arts, CRMC, which is a Coastal Resource Management Council, human rights, even RIPTA, scenic roadway, workforce board, adaptive telephone, capital center, development disabilities, industrial facilities, landscape architects, medical, motor vehicle. That's just for a doctor, actually, but I just wrote it down because I've been searching for one. Serve Rhode Island, industrial recreation, just to name a few. So but there's so many out there that, if I get an application, I'll find something for you. Now, you may not like it, and that's fine. I don't want to put anybody on. I wish that I had known more about your situation.
Mhm.
Because normally, we're in an election year this year
Yeah.
but normally you don't meet, at least that's my
Yeah,
impression.
yeah, no, it's just, it's
So,
been a
so
weird
we're in
election
a-
years.
And some of these things, one of the databases that we're looking at, I wanted to put in there too. We had an old database and that I found, and this was done under Gina Raimondo. She actually had requested some, I had two, without getting too much in the weeds, I had two RFPs that I was about to send out. And I sent it over to the head of IT because I wanted to see if he saw something in there that I didn't, or vice versa, as the case may be. He sent me back the next morning to get an email. Oh, we had a database we developed about 5 years ago, 6 years ago. Would you like to take it for a test drive? Come on over, I'll take it. I started it. We tried to do that. It's on Microsoft Access. If anybody knows Microsoft Access, it's the best total relational database there is in the world. The problem is, it relates so good that it's so complex to try to extrapolate any individual information out of it. So I've been keeping that, but it's going nowhere. The one that I was looking at is a public facing, it's nice and easy, tells you how many meetings, it tells you how many, what the synopsis is about the meeting. Each one is different. And when you get on a board, I'm sure you've had a chance to sway the board in a different direction as well. So
So Craig,
Yes.
what we will do after today's meeting is we'll take your list and we'll
Yeah,
share it
sure,
out with this group.
sure.
We'll also share your contact information.
Yep.
It's a short term addressing some of the current needs.
Absolutely.
We're starting to come towards the close of tonight's program. I also wanted to hear from Lisa. Now, Lisa serves on one of those large nonprofit boards that I was referencing earlier. By the way, our research reports are on that table over there if anybody wants to take a look. One of those organizations that's in that report is Neighborhood Health Plan. And since Lisa, this is different than a state board and commission, a large nonprofit board in Rhode Island, maybe you could talk just briefly about how you got recruited to serve on that board. And are they doing anything to help address diversity issues within the board itself or the organization?
Yeah, so thanks, Kelly. And I've been serving on boards for decades now, and I think it has been a challenge around diversification of boards. I think one of the things that Neighborhood is doing, and it's a privilege actually to serve with Peter and the board. We think about diversity at the board level, at the C-suite level, across the board. Diversity, equity, and inclusion is embedded in everything that happens at Neighborhood. It's not just like in a silo. So when we talked about the pipeline, we build a pipeline. So we're constantly identifying people in our community that potentially could serve on our planning committee. The planning committee sort of the feeder into the board.
Mhm.
So initially, I got recruited by Peter, the CEO, to serve on the planning committee. At that point, I was at B of A, and I think I did 2 years or 4 years on the planning committee. And that's really to get you sort of a full overview of how the organization operates, the key priorities, what are the big items that they're focused on, whether it's around Medicaid or the population that we serve, but also how do we reflect and look at the workforce. So at the C-suite level, so Pete probably has one of the most diversified organization in the healthcare system, specifically with women of color and people of color in his leadership team. Very recently, the chief diversity officer was actually ranked nationwide as one of the top DEI professionals across the nation. When you think about a pathway upward, so they also plan around looking at constantly evaluating the staff throughout the organization, all different levels. Do we have the right skill set? And do we have a pipeline? So what I absolutely love is that early on, while I was on the planning committee, they had an HR director that I had lunch and coffee and everything with her because I wanted to see the data. What is it telling us? Because you can imagine, right? Black folks said, oh my God, so many Black and brown people are working at neighborhood. I'm getting people, right? Always calling me, Lisa this, Lisa that, Lisa. So I was getting intel, right? That I was able to share with the leadership team. I think that organization, again, as I mentioned, I served at lots of other organizations. I remember getting an invite to consider to go on Blue Cross Blue Shield's board at the time I was at B of A. I did not say yes because of the heavy lifting. It was a lot, it was a huge commitment, right? So I think many, and even with, I'll touch on Rod very little bit at Roger Williams Hospital. I think everyone wants to diversify their workforce. What we have seen in many cases, they don't know how to do it, right? One of the things that we do here at the association is I'll make myself available to folks that have reached out to say, we need help with diversification. The other thing, coming back to neighborhood, they have about 10 employee resource groups. So the resource groups are groups of made up of professionals or individual from the organization that serves. They have a vice chair and a chair, and then they have a senior leader that serves as the sponsor for that employee resource group. So that means they're empowering their staff at the employee resource group level to come and tell us what needs to change. I know Neighborhood has been ranked one of the top organizations for the last maybe 5 years, top performing in their level of healthcare across the country. We have a CEO that actually listens carefully. And you have somebody like me on the board and a couple others that are not shy with saying, we want to understand that pipeline, right? Who's in the pipeline? Are they getting additional professional development? All of that. So I think the organization is super diverse at the staff level. They have a pipeline program. They're actually each year, Neighborhood sends 4 or 3 people to our Emerging Leaders Program. That's a feeder program that really gets people to think about who are aspiring to be leaders. So they're in their 5 to 7 year career journey. So we've had over the last 3 years, a great relationship with them as a feeder program, if you will. So these are individuals that they tap in the organization and then says, you are demonstrating over and over some key qualities that we believe we want to see you continue to thrive. And then there's a pathway for them to level up. So, you know, I sent a note earlier this, when Talia got her recognition of being this top DEI person, I said, if Peter, the CEO, did not create the environment for her to come in and thrive and develop these programming, the organization would not be where it's at today. So I think we must have the right leaders in place that really prioritize diversity, equity, and inclusion and make it a part of their key priorities. So if you talk to leaders and they don't have diversity, equity, and inclusion on their priority projects each year, they're not serious about leveling their playing field in their organization and inclusion in any way. If you're saying, and then the other thing that Neighborhood does, which is I think is super, I've been pushing for that for a couple of years. The HR function reports into the diversity chair. So that's flipped upside down, right? Most company has your HR function and your DI under your function. I had been pushing for years and we finally last year actually switched it around. So the entire HR function reports into the chief.
And when
people
you
officer.
say we've been pushing, you mean from the board level?
The board level.
Yes,
Yeah,
which is a great way to enact change.
correct. Yeah,
Yeah.
the board level, right? Because we've looked at, and again, I was one of the loudest mouth and voices there. Looking at data points, looking at what we saw many years ago. I'm not sure if anyone remember when Congress actually called in all of the top banks across the country to come and say, talk to us about your diversity program. And these guys, most of them were guys, I think they were all guys actually, had no clue what was going on with their pipeline program, pay equity, all of that, none of that, right? And they had suggested that DEI is not over here somewhere. DEI needs to be like on the top and your HR function rolls up into DEI. Because think about it, if your HR function reports into if your DEI function reports into your DEI, into your HR, think about that. They're gonna control what happens.
What you saying?
But if it's the other way around, which is neighborhood is really, I would say in Rhode Island, really outperforming in many other insurance companies because they are really serious about DEI.
Yeah.
So that's the best practice, right? Flip it around, move your HR function under DEI, because you can't police yourself.
Hmm.
The other thing that they have done, which is super cool, is really, as we think about pay equity, that law that was recently passed, looking across salary base, across the industry, what are we seeing from a trend perspective? And they have do some reset. And I know there are several companies that I know of that have actually done that, that mean evaluate where people are at in the organization as it relates to pay equity. And they've done some leveling up where there were some, people that were off. And I think many companies, I know the larger firms have done that, specifically making sure that people are able to feed their families.
Right.
That the salary got bumped up. There were several people that I heard of that said, oh my God, I didn't realize I was so underpaid. I got a bump in my salary once that law became passed. So kudos to all of us that push for that pay equity bill, right? And continue to push for that because we're hearing from people that they're seeing their salaries bumped up. And then the other piece is, again, the workforce. They're so competitive. In order for you to keep and attract and retain top talent, you gotta make sure that you're paying people what the fair share is. So I think lots of movement there, but we gotta keep the foot on the gas because there's so much work to be done still.
I want to be sure that we give you all an opportunity to ask questions or make any comments that you'd like to before we close this evening. So I open it to the audience. Yes.
I'm completely new to the world of even the term board, like it's like everything is really new tonight, and it sounds like there's tremendous variability in what you're signing on to, like 3 meetings a week. I can't even imagine. So I'm just wondering like how that works if you wanted to, or maybe you have an idea of like, okay, I have some content expertise in this area, or this would be maybe a good fit for me. But like, it's so, I'm trying to wrap my head around, like, everything I've ever applied for is like really transparent in terms of like this number of hours per week, is this these days per week, is it weekly, is it monthly, is it
Yeah.
variable, is it multiple days?
Sure, sure. And I'll be clear that what we've been talking about are sort of the higher level state boards and commissions and large nonprofit boards. Nonprofits as a whole generally have boards of directors that support them, some of whom meet just quarterly, some that meet monthly, some that require active participation within the organization. Depending on how big the organization is, it might be an entirely volunteer-driven nonprofit, or it might have staff. So it all depends on, which type of organization you're interested in. I will say for somebody who's brand new to board service or considering it for the very first time, The volunteer center, which is managed through the United Way of Rhode Island, typically lists board opportunities with small nonprofits. So I would highly recommend that you check them out. The Rhode Island Foundation actually has a free board member boot camp for new board members who want to do right by the organizations that they're interested in. And if you're just getting started and you don't have any clue where to go, think about the issues in the organizations that you already know, that you're already passionate about. If you are an animal lover, is there, an animal rescue organization in your community to get involved in? If you're passionate about reproductive rights, what organizations are serving those particular issues? Reach out to them, become a volunteer, have a conversation with folks who are connected to the organization, and find out if they're recruiting for their boards. So in many ways, it can be a much less daunting process to get connected to those boards than what we've been talking about tonight, where you do actually have to go through a much more formal application process. You might have to be confirmed by the Senate for some state boards and commissions. For the larger nonprofits, generally tend to and need to have some sort of professional credentialing, and perhaps you've been a donor to the organization in the past. So it does look a little bit different. I don't know if other folks have anything that
No,
they'd like
I
to.
just wanted to say, one of the things that I hadn't mentioned is that most of my leads come from the individual board managers. And I'll ask, do you have anybody that you know of that is interested in serving? And to Marcella's situation, I had somebody recently wanted to know what how big a lift was it for this particular board? I'm not the guy that answers that. I put them in contact with the board manager, and that way they know. Unfortunately, I guess we didn't do that with you,
No, no,
but
that's-
anyway, so
not you.
it's not a fail-safe system, obviously.
No, but but I agree. I think that even if you were considering even
Yeah.
whatever city or town you live in, even if, because I think
Yeah.
those are also really important. If you want to serve in a municipal board, look at what they do, right? So is it the liquor, is it the licensing board, which they do a lot of stuff, and they're like, to me, they're one of the most powerful
Sure.
boards in a municipality.
Well, I was 12 years
Yeah,
on that. and
exactly.
there were weekends that we had
Correct.
like 3 emergency
Sure.
meetings in a row.
Yeah,
and it's
so
like-
those are really busy, right? So I think what I would say is if you're interested in government boards, I would look at the descriptions, and I think to his point, I do think that's an interesting idea of looking at who's the manager of those, right? Because I think that can be really helpful. I think serving, again, I'll say it again, serving in your local city or town boards can be, sometimes you can be a lot more impactful, and I think what you said earlier, I think it's really great of, can we list 10 boards that have the most direct impact in communities? I think that would be beautiful, because we don't talk about that enough. So I would say, sorry to
Yeah.
interrupt you. So I would say go into municipalities if you would just want to look around. There's enough information, and hopefully your city's responsive. They're not always.
Yeah, you're so spot on. The other thing I would add around for new board, if you're considering a new board, I would say in many cases, think about the skill set or capabilities that you bring
Yep.
from your professional background. So if you're going on a board that can leverage your skill set, so for example, here, we map out what are the skills that we're looking for.
Mhm.
So while we get a lot of people that want to come and serve on our board, because we're working on social impact issues, we don't take all the people that wants to come and serve. Because we're a small team, but we're actually a working board. So that means we leverage some of the skills and capabilities from individual that's on our board. So for example, right now we're looking for, I think we just locked in one, but we're looking for a corporate attorney. Somebody that deals with corporate stuff. We're looking for somebody with an HR background, marketing, communication. So what you'll find, smaller nonprofits are looking for people that is gonna kind of help to augment their staff because they are
Capacity.
so small, right? And they're looking for help.
Mhm.
Our organization, we meet bi-monthly,
Mhm.
but each board member is required to serve on at least 2 committees. And that's where the actual work gets done, at the community level, right? So I think about what skill set you want to, kind of deploy and what that looks like. And I say, Kelly noted it earlier, but what's that passion, right? I get, people ask me all the time to serve on boards and commission and all of that. For me, I'm super intentional.
Mhm.
I won't go on any boards where they don't align with my purpose or the work that I want to do. So, and you and I, Craig, we've had lots of exchange of emails where you wanted me to go on this. Somebody in the governor's office recommended me to go on some board where they never meet. Maybe there were 4 people and there's only one standing on there. It was this weird situation, but anyway, yeah.
could be.
But I wanted to go on things where I aligned.
Mhm.
And that's super important because then you're gonna be able to bring your whole self into this role. But there's a lot of amazing opportunities out there, organizations and cities
Mhm.
and state can definitely use so much. I think one of the things, Kelly, that I would love to volunteer for is to share information that becomes available.
Mhm.
We have over almost 100 emerging leaders now that are looking for opportunities.
Mhm.
So consider Reba as a hub
Mhm.
for
Mhm.
talent, if you will.
That's a good idea.
Lots of talented individuals that are looking
Mhm.
to be deployed out on service projects.
Mhm.
So certainly consider us as a place of a little
There's
hub,
enough-
if you will.
There's enough boards open.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, in terms of just sheer numbers of nonprofits in Rhode Island, I think right now there's over 5,000 that are listed with the Department of Business Regulations. Now, it may be that not all of them are as active as others.
Yeah.
But certainly there's 1,000 in Rhode Island that could use a good board member to join, so.
Yeah,
Um,
and one thing, Kelly, I just sent, all of our partnering banks reached out to us recently and asked for organization that some of their top colleagues could serve on. Again, I mentioned I'm intentional, so I found all of the minority-led organization, Hispanic and Blacks and right? Where they don't always get people that want to consider. So I said, I'm challenging you to have your senior VPs, senior leaders explore organization, not the same one that you used to go to, right? Crossroad, Amos House, Food Bank. They're getting all of the amazing people already, but you could also think about these organizations that could use some talent.
Yeah.
So I provided, and I'm happy to share that, I provided this nice list over to about 20 companies, larger companies, to say, get your senior VPs and your executive leaders to explore connecting with these leaders from these various organizations and see if there's a good fit. So again, being intentional and coming out of your comfort zone to go fund and support an organization that's doing incredible work, but needs a little bit more hand up.
Thank you. And with that, I'm going to close tonight's program. It's getting close to 7:00. I truly appreciate your attention and interest in this matter. I want to thank each of our panelists this evening. We do have information about the Women's Fund on the far end of the table there, and we invite you to our upcoming events. We have a hashtag I'm Remarkable that'll be taking place in late April. We have Help Her Run, which is a new campaign manager training, and our own Jordan Bannock in the room is going to be facilitating that program. And then Elevate Your Career, which is a career mentoring speed networking event that'll take place in mid-May. So we hope you'll pass the word, and thank you all for your time. Have a great night.
Oh, yeah, absolutely.
I'm a big fan of big windows.